Gentlemen, welcome to the Be the Man podcast. Thanks for making the time to be here and for engaging. We've been out on the road now for several weeks, having epic adventures as a family, creating fantastic memories, meeting with lots and lots of great people. Led the Be the Man trip, where we did Slot Canyons, and then led a youth trip, which was amazing. And just I had opportunities to speak, meet with different groups. It's just been a really awesome time. And we're still out on the road, heading back soon. Just excited to be alive and doing great things and having awesome experiences. So I wanted to dive into a topic today. I had some experiences recently, interestingly, both in person and online. And had some more this morning that, man, it's funny, man. People will have these ideas and these convictions, and I get it. We're going to talk through that today. But you latch onto this idea and you just grab hold of it. And if you're not really careful, and this is true for all of us, we're all susceptible to this. You latch onto an idea because it feels good or it seems right. And man, you lock onto that thing and you hold on to it because it had enough there to satiate something, to satisfy something, to give you something to grab hold of. And so we grab hold of it, but if we aren't willing to really truly examine it and see the whole thing, then ultimately what ends up happening, gentlemen, is we grab hold of a half-truth and we only get half the results. So what kind of got the idea, this has been happening a lot, right? And you've seen it. You've experienced it. You've grabbed onto half-truths. I've grabbed onto half-truths. You've talked to people who, latch onto it. And so you've experienced this, and we talk through this. You'll be like, yep, I get that, see that, and maybe even experience it ourselves. And so we have to, I guess the goal today is to recognize these half-truths and see where we can grab onto more truth. And or even if we're going to use it, but use it knowing that it's not complete, it's not whole. So I went to, it had been several weeks since I'd had a haircut. I was trying to find a haircut. We were out traveling. I was calling around. Everyone's booked up for months. It was crazy. Finally found a place after trying, calling lots of places for a couple of weeks with no luck. There was just no openings. And so finally I called several places, and one shop said they could squeeze me in. In fact, they even said, no, we can't. I'm like, please. I'm like, I got to get a haircut here. And so I didn't know the area very well. I was just looking on the map. I'm like, okay, any shop I'm just calling that had good reviews. It ends up being in this rough part of the city, and it was quite the cultural experience to go in there. And it was one of the chattiest groups of workers and customers that I'd heard. It was like this philosophy shop, man. Everyone's in there just sharing their ideas and their philosophy with the whole group, like speaking over top of each other, and oh yeah, well this, and telling the story, and well that, and I do this, and this is the way things are in life. And it was a very poor demographic, predominantly less education, rough lifestyles and stories and experiences. Really reminded me of the time that I had lived out on my own. When I was 16, 17, I was in rough areas just trying to survive. And it was just an echo from the past. And this echo has been repeated forward now for a couple of decades. And these people was believing these same things and grabbing onto these half-truths that ultimately, gentlemen, they really limit us and keep us in our present condition and keep us in these spots where we can't really progress because we're only holding on to half a truth, right? And man, they talked the whole time. My haircut took at least twice as long, maybe 3 times as long as it should have, because she would just turn the clippers off and just talk and talk and talk and talk. No cutting, and it was interesting. So it was this, in some ways, that shop was an echo chamber of some of the worst life advice I have ever heard. And they were all practically shouting it to everyone in the place, everyone within earshot. They wanted to be heard which is also interesting. There's a lot of principles there. So in about an hour, I learned about all the terrible choices and tragic circumstances of their lives. And this woman who was cutting my hair, she just desperately wanted to tell me her whole life story and all her philosophies about life. And I was blown away by all the half-truths that I heard in that place in an hour, right? And I get to work closely with people every day about their highest goals and their lowest struggles. It's such a privilege, and I love it. And I love connecting and helping and serving and getting past generally what, because we have like filters or boundaries where most people we kind of keep out at a distance, right? And then there's a few people, really trusted people, we let them all the way in. And it's not that we're, some people are putting on a facade or a mask, but it's not like we're all doing that. But you just, certain people you like, yeah, you stay out there, right? Understandably, right? But then to work closely with people, and I've worked with many thousands of people across 5 continents. And having had all that experience with people from all walks of life, man, I found it so interesting and so sad that this small group of people in this shop had so fully embraced so many half-truths. Now, the problem with a half-truth is that they sound so good on the surface. And you hear them and you think about them kind of surface level, superficially, and it makes you feel good. You're like, yeah, that's great. And so you grab hold of it. And it'll even happen with choices. Maybe you're going along and you hear something or try something, and because it's a pattern interrupter, because it changes the initial circumstance, you think, man, this is gold. I feel so much better than I was feeling. And so you grab hold of it. It becomes your conviction. It becomes your new religion, your new way of doing things. And boy, you're going to hold on to that because you got some results from it. And it feels so good and it sounds so good. And when you talk about it, others are like, yeah, that's great. And so you keep it. But then, unfortunately, you stay there. You stay stuck because you grab hold of that thing. It's like you've heard about how they were capturing monkeys. They made a box that was with a hole in the box. They put a nut, like a favorite nut for the monkey. I think this was in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. But the monkey would reach through. You had to, nothing in the hand. You had to squeeze through, make their hand, long, elongated to squeeze through the hole. Then they'd grab hold of the nut, and when they tried to pull the nut out of the hole in the box, they couldn't, because their fist was too big to slide through the hole. And then when the researchers went out to grab hold of them, they wouldn't let go of the nut. And they're just like, they're stuck. And even if that's true, even if it's not true, I mean, it's a great metaphor, right? It's a perfect analogy for what we're talking about. Like, we'll grab hold of something, and now they're stuck. The monkey won't run away, won't let go of the box, won't let go of the nut, and gets captured. Although it was just for research, it wasn't bad, but they wouldn't let go of it, right? And we'll get like this sometimes. We'll grab hold of a half-truth, and we get stuck. And it prevents us from bigger and better things because we're holding on to it. So let's go through some examples. And I'm sure you have even more examples. And as we talk through this, I want you to think of like half-truths maybe you've noticed, or maybe even have grabbed hold of and realized, man, that's kind of holding me back. And it'll happen around health and fitness. Maybe you're going along and you're just unhealthy, and then you try something, you're like, whoa, I feel so much better, and man, you latch onto that thing and don't explore more, or aren't open to other things because you're like, I got results, I got religion, baby, this is my thing. And so you hold on to that when there's quite a bit more. There's more possibilities there with fitness and exercises and ways to train or ways to eat and different things. And maybe it was a step in the right direction, but I guess, I love that visual. You took a couple of steps in the right direction. It felt so good. You got so many results. You think, that's it. Boom. I got this. And so because you took a couple steps in the right direction, you're going to set up camp there because you're like, no, look look how far I've come. Look how this works for us. This is great. I moved this in this direction. Boom, we're setting up camp. You drive in your stakes. Maybe some of you like build foundations there and build a permanent structure because it felt so good. But like you missed out on more steps in the right direction, and even a full journey, a lifetime journey in the right direction that could take you to heights that are unimaginable. But because you took a couple steps in the right direction, you're like, this is it. We have arrived in the promised land. And so I want all of us to examine that and really explore it and see if grabbing hold of something, although good, was just partial. It was a fragment. Or it was something that got you onto another path that eventually you might even let go of that completely. It was good. It was good. It was what you needed at the time, and it got you moving in a better direction. But you'll end up letting go of that as you move further up the path. And it was simply a stepping stone, and you don't have to stay back on that stepping stone because you're going on a journey. So don't build your village on a stepping stone. Keep going on as we keep progressing and learning, and there will be some things that were useful at the time, but then we will let go of later on. Man, there's just so many ways to go with this, and so many different visual things or metaphors. Even a great chef is going to learn these basic rules and principles and how things work. They follow the rules. But then eventually they actually will break some of those rules to make these masterpieces, and they'll try very unconventional things to make just these wonderful, wonderful foods. But they absolutely had to learn the rules first. And that's what makes them great chefs. Right? So let's just give some examples. Again, you're going to have a lot more examples. You're going to think through all kinds of things, and I hope you'll take this principle, this idea into your life, and as you move forward through life, looking for all these things like, I wonder if there's more to this. I wonder if this is a half truth. I wonder if this, I've said at other times that almost every strength, perhaps every strength, has an inherent weakness in that strength. And that might be similar to what we're going to talk about here of these truths. You're like, yeah, that's so great, but it's not always true. So here are some examples. Compassion, right? Be a compassionate person. Have compassion for others. Have compassion for yourself. Man, that's great, right? It feels good. It's wonderful. We want to be compassionate. I know I want to be compassionate. I want you to be compassionate. But compassion can actually, at a certain point, become a vice, where at some point, perhaps this fits into the law of diminishing returns, where too much compassion actually starts causing problems. Where we have too much compassion on people, then we start taking away growth and strength and opportunities for them. Like this will show up in parenting easily, right? You want to have compassion, especially for little babies, right? They cry out and they don't. They're incapable, and man, we respond to them immediately. You're not to your little baby. You're like, hey, stop! You need to be tougher. Life's tough, kid. Stop crying, right? You're not gonna do that to a baby, but as they grow with age, you still have compassion, but you now are saying, yeah, you know what, that is tough. That's really hard, and I understand how you feel. That can be so frustrating. Let's see how we can keep pushing through that. Instead of, where we see this a lot now, there's in this idea of being compassionate, we're like, oh yeah, and you're doing this to like teenagers or even grown men. I've heard stories of men in their 50s and 60s still being cared for and provided for by their mothers who are in their 80s or 90s, because like, oh, you poor thing, that's so hard. Let me take care of that for you. This is for grown men. And so that's when compassion becomes a vice, because it becomes demoralizing and crippling. And so there's a limit. So yes, that's a truth. We should have compassion, but to be compassionate all the time and always have compassion, it's only a half truth. It's like, yeah, it's true, but it needs to be tempered. It needs to be used appropriately and never to the weakening or detriment of someone. So you might say, like an example of small children, when our little girls fall down or get hurt or they're crying over something, they're upset, we don't just jump in and scold or correct or even teach in the moment, right? They fall down and get hurt, and you're like, see, I told you. That's the wrong time to do that. I pick them up, I hold them, and I'm like, oh, that hurts, doesn't it? Like, yeah, it hurts. And I'm like, oh, man, okay. Well, it's sure a good thing that you're so tough and that you're going to figure out how to do that better and watch out for that. Like, you got this. This is amazing, right? So I'm compassionate, but then as soon as they're ready, it might take a moment, as soon as they're ready, I'm moving on from compassion to how can we prevent this? How can you outgrow this? How can you be tougher than this thing? How can you keep going? Instead of where, maybe they fall off their bike and your compassion's so big and so grand that bike, don't ever get on that bike again. And I know it sounds crazy, it sounds silly, but how many people in life got knocked off of something, got bruised or bumped or hurt by something? They took a risk, it didn't work out, and they said, man, I'm never doing that again. And the people around them like, yeah, you poor thing, just stay away from it. Investments are dangerous. And I'll hear people say that. Oh, I tried real estate once. I tried the stock market once. I tried starting my business once. That's just crazy. This is terrible, horrible. Don't ever do that. And they're like, yeah, it got you, right? And your compassion makes it so they become weaker and even crippled sometimes. So there's one example. Another one is tolerance, right? We want to be tolerant of others, right? We want to be open and considerate and thoughtful. And the idea of tolerance, wow, it's great. It feels good. It feels good to shout that message. Let's be more tolerant. And we get all these people becoming activists for tolerance. And that's true to a point. But it's only a half-truth. Because tolerance, too much tolerance, becomes a vice. And then it becomes a major personal, family, and social problem. And it can be, it actually becomes a social poison. Because then we start, in the name of tolerance, we start tolerating everything. Even bizarre, weird, unhealthy, toxic behaviors that are self-destructive, but are also destructive and very, even extremely harmful to society. Where people who aren't checked in their weird, unhealthy behaviors, in the name of tolerance, we allow anything to go, and then they end up becoming shooters, or killers, or suicidal, or toxic, or dangerous. And so much of that can be prevented back upstream by saying, you know what, we have compassion and we have tolerance, but there's a line. There has to be a line. Somebody's got to draw the line in the sand and say, nope, you can't go beyond this. That's not okay. And it's not okay for your own self-destruction, and it's definitely not okay because those self-destructive behaviors very often turn to some kind of trauma, attack, violence, something around the people around them, the proximity, and then even sometimes just innocent public. And so tolerance is great to a point. So just preaching and shouting for tolerance, it's only a half-truth. It's only a half-truth that can become very, very dangerous. At some point, we should not tolerate certain things from people. Now, it's not always a hard black and white line. These are complicated issues. When to have compassion and tolerance, and how much, and with whom, and why, and where do you draw the line? It's not always black and white, but there has to be a line. There has to be a place where tolerance is too much and it becomes out of control. There's that poem about vice is a monster frightful mean, as to be hated needs but to be seen. Seen too oft, familiar with her face, first we endure, then pity, then embrace. Right? And it's just this progressive movement of, and we're all afraid, like society has made us afraid of being intolerant or of lacking compassion, right? You feel like, ooh, geez, that's bad. That's terrible. And people will do that. Like if you say, hey, no, the tolerance stops here. That's just weird. That's just bizarre. It's unhealthy. That should not be happening in our schools, in our homes, in our churches, in our society. That kind of crap cannot be going on. Like, you're so intolerant. You don't have compassion. And they start throwing rocks at you and labeling you and throwing you under the bus, making you feel bad that you're not more tolerant. But that's one of those half-truths. Here's another one. Moderation in all things. Man, I've heard that preached and shouted and taught endlessly since I was young. And I was like, yeah, that's great. And I remember grabbing hold of it and teaching it for a while. Like, we got to have moderation, And then I started thinking, like, wait a minute, that's only a half-truth. Moderation in all things, because you don't want to be extreme. You don't want to be fanatical. You don't want to be obsessed. But then you start thinking through, like, wait a minute. Are there times to be extreme? Are there times to be obsessed? Are there times where moderation actually holds you back? And so we've grabbed onto this idea because it feels good. Hey, moderation in all things. And most of the time people are using that as an excuse to lower their standards and to let things slide a little bit and to acquiesce and settle for less, right? Because they're doing, they're using, well, no, you got to have moderation in all things. And I'm like, well, whatever. So are there things that we should not be moderate in at all? And I can think some of those things of, like, how about fidelity and loyalty and commitment, right? Should you be moderate in your commitment and loyalty and fidelity to your wife? Should you be moderate, just moderately in love with her? Should you be moderate as a father and parent? Like, I'm going to be moderate as a dad here. I don't want to be a great dad. That might be, with moderation in all things. Or how about your commitment to, like, keep your body healthy and not put trash in it and toxins or in your mind? Should you be moderate about your potential addictions or addictions? Should you be moderate in that? Like, let's just keep that in moderation. I from my perspective, there are a lot of things in the world for which we should not be moderate at all. None. So moderation in all things? No. It's only half-truth, right? And some things we should not be. I'm never going to be a moderate husband. I'm never going to be moderate in my fidelity and in my faith and in my desire to be my best self. Like, no, I'm just, be moderate in all things. And it sounds good and it feels good. You're like, wait a minute, I don't want to be moderate at all. Moderate's kind of a nice way of saying mediocre. And again, like, so it's a half-truth because you're like, in certain circumstances, like, yeah, hey man, you need to chillax a little bit. You're a little extreme there. You're going too far. But then there's other times like, no, go, man. Go all the way in. You need some serious results. Go for it. Become obsessed with that. And temporarily let your life get a little out of balance so you can get those results. Like, go all in. Another half-truth is this idea of no shaming. Don't shame. It's become so popular. People are like, stop shaming. Don't shame people. You can't shame them. You can't shame them. Don't shame anyone. No. Oh, and if you try to point something out or be a reality check or if you try to draw some kind of boundary, people are like, stop shaming, right? And again, there it is, half-truth. You're like, yeah, that's true. We shouldn't shame people. And when you talk about it, you feel good. Like, no, oh yeah, don't shame. But then you start thinking about, like, well, wait a minute. Is there a place for shame? What about really shameful behavior? Shouldn't that be shamed? Isn't there a line somewhere where we say, hey, that's shameful, and you should feel ashamed for shameful behavior? Right? There has to be a line, a limit. And so it's like, yeah, it's true to a point. At least from my perspective, I think there are very clear behaviors that are shameful. And dadgummit, you should feel ashamed for that. And if others are shaming you for shameful behavior, like, oh, I'm okay with that. right? So no shaming at all. I don't know. I think that's only a half truth that can become toxic. Another one is like we kind of sneak into this like, well, look, I'm not as bad as that person, or I'm not as bad as that, and we use that kind of comparison to be like, well, it could be much worse, or I made a mistake, but it's not that bad. I didn't make go that far. You're like, yeah, okay, that's true, and that's good, and you're like, yeah, you're right. You did make a mistake, but it wasn't that bad, right? It wasn't as bad as this possible mistake, and that's true. But there we go again. It's only a half truth. Like when you start comparing down, boy, you can just talk yourself way, way, way down out of your standards. Just constantly say, well, it's not that bad. Well, it's not that bad. And as society continues to lower the standard of mediocrity, you just keep riding that, riding that ride all the way down. Like, see, it's not that bad. Well, at least it's not that bad. And again, it becomes a half truth. So you're right. Yeah, it is true to a point that it's not that bad. But it's also, when you turn around and look the other direction, hey, it's not that good either. And I want to be looking up and pursuing greatness, not continually looking down saying, well, at least it wasn't that bad. That's one. Here's another one. Love yourself. That's true. You should love yourself. Big time. But is there a point where self-love can become unhealthy or protective, but in a negative sense, where it's keeping you from growth and improvement and transformation and change you need to make, where you this point where, this is the way I see it, like you look yourself in the mirror and be like, hey, look, self, you're way better than that. And right in this thing, you suck. And you seriously need to change. And what you're doing is unacceptable. It's a lot less than your best. And you know it. You're capable of more than this. Right? But this whole self-love movement is like, hey, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it doesn't matter. Just love yourself. And love yourself all the way to self-destruction. Just keep loving yourself. And so, again, it's a truth that feels good, but is only partially true. Another one that kind of fits with that is like, well, your body, whatever condition it's in, it's beautiful and it's healthy the way it is. Well, that's true, but only to a point. If you're out of shape and overweight and you're unhealthy, yeah, you should still love yourself and love and appreciate your body and be beautiful. And, but that's only half true, because there's just some really solid science that if you're overweight, for example, or obese, like there's some intense, like dead serious negative effects there that's affecting your body and your brain and the normal functioning of your organs. And so, like, yeah, that's true, but to a point, you got to stop and say, hey, this is unacceptable. I need to get my body back into a healthy condition. Another one I heard recently on social media, we were posting things about helping your kids, how to help your kids be finishers and follow through and do things. And we had these comments on there, man, super intense, just really black and white. No, you need to make your kids finish things. And I was like, well, that's great, right? You want your kids to be finishers. You don't want them to be weak. And there's a huge problem of youth and young adults unable to finish things, unable to follow through. And so we grab onto this idea of like, yeah, make your kids finish things so they learn how to be finishers. And I say, yes, to a point. I think it's only a half truth, because kids are also human beings. And they need to have their experiences, their thoughts, their ideas, and their development brought into consideration and validated. They need to be heard and understood and loved, and most importantly, led. If you have to make your kids do things, at least from my perspective, you're not leading very well. Because if you love them and acknowledge them, you have a great relationship with them, and you're teaching them and modeling for them, showing them how to finish things in a good way, and showing them, like, the way you live needs to be appealing to your children. When they look at it and say, I want that. That's fantastic. I want to live that life. But if you're living a life that your kids look at you like, why would I do what you say? Look at your life. Look at yourself, right? If you have to make your kids do things all the time, you're not leading very well. Now, are there times where we need to make our kids do something? Sure. But grabbing hold of that thing is just in a truth and just holding on to it and preaching that and making that your religion, no, you're gonna actually end up doing damage to your kids. And just because they finish it doesn't mean they actually will become finishers, because they might have just done it not because they chose it, because you made them. And you walk away saying, ha, see, my kids finish things. It's like, well, yeah, as soon as you're not around, what are they going to do? The only way they become finishers is if you guide them and mentor them to choose to finish on their own. And that's a journey and a process, and be healthy. Same of like, the other thing that came up was like, parents aren't supposed to be friends with their kids, because we posted something about wanting to be best friends with our children. And we do, and we are. And I want that. When my kids grow up and they're adult, I love hanging out with my kids and doing things with kids, having adventures and memories and doing great things with my kids. And I want to keep doing that with their spouses and their kids. And I get it. I get the principle of don't be your kids' friends, right? And I've taught that. Like, you're the parent, you're the mentor, you're the role model leader. You're not here to be their friend, because I've seen that go the wrong way, right? So there's another half truth is, hey, you got to be your kid's friend. You're like, yeah, to a point. Or the other side, don't be your kids' friends. And parents, you're not there to be their friends. You're there to be their parent. Yes, that's true, but to a point. And so we don't latch on or grab hold of anything that's partially true, because there's more to it. And if you have an awesome relationship with them, and you're leading them and mentoring them and parenting them and teaching them, setting that example, and you have a great relationship, and you're leading them to really great healthy habits and patterns and mindsets and heart sets and skill sets, and they're becoming phenomenal adults, then yes, one of the greatest rewards of parenting is being phenomenal friends with your kids. So those are just some ideas, and I hope you're going to have so many more, and just go through exploring. Do some thinking about this. Do some meditating and pondering around this. Do some journal writing. Do some writing exercises. Examine some of the things you've grabbed hold of and say, man, I wonder if these are only half true, if they're partially true, or is it a strength that has an inherent weakness? As you're having conversations this next week or two, as you hear people on social media or in podcasts or on videos, YouTube, whatever, TV, like you're hearing it, just saying, oh, that's interesting, right? As you're hearing these activists in society saying, well, this is the way it is on either side. And sometimes we get one side or the other, right? We'll go far right or far left, or Republican or Democrat or whatever. I mean, we take these sides and look on both sides. Be willing to examine, especially if you're predominantly on one side over the other. Look around on your side. Be like, wonder if there's some half-truths here. And then look on the other side, if there is another side. I love the idea of like, hey, we're all just in this together. And look on the other side and say, oh, that's interesting. I used to dismiss what they were saying, but maybe that's only partially true or partially not true. And look at these half-truths and see how we can examine them further and expand our own understanding. I'm confident I still have blind spots and still have not examined fully, so many things. There's so much I don't know. And I'm confident there's things I latched onto years ago, like, oh, that's it. And I grab hold of it. And then as I go through life, be like, oh, actually, so I had a little tighter grip on that than I should have, because yes, it's true to a point. And there's other things to be understood. And some things are very black and white, and some things aren't very black and white. But that doesn't mean they're all gray either. And it doesn't mean there aren't boundaries and lines. And some things are relative, but it doesn't mean everything's relative. And sometimes relativity is trouble. And sometimes it's great. And so we're just walking through life, learning wisdom and learning to see things as they really are. And recognizing a half-truth is great. It's fantastic. But we can't just see it as whole when it's not complete or whole. So anyways, just some food for thought to think about, gentlemen. Hey, connect with me on social media, on Instagram or Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't subscribed already, and share it. Take a screenshot of it, share it with friends, family, colleagues. You can leave a review up to 5 stars for the podcast so we can get this out to more men. I've got some awesome interviews lined up, some really, really great stuff coming down the line across all kinds of different aspects of what it means to be a man. So, gentlemen, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Be the man.